You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show discussing more legal and tax issues with K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. Roger, thanks for joining us once again.
Good to be with you, Shelby.
Roger, you recently wrote a blog article covering some more issues that sometimes people in agriculture can be facing. And so as we talk through a few of these different topics, first one involving partnerships and how partnerships are formed.
Yeah, farmers and ranchers often do business informally on a number of things, and that includes business relationships. It might be with a tenant, it might be you hire someone to work with you, it might be a family member that's working with you. Well, it's that informality. In many instances, these relationships to writing, so we don't really know from a legal standpoint what type of relationship it is, but it's that informality that raises the question of whether that business arrangement has created a partnership. Well, if something happens, say a liability event, and it's determined that you're in a partnership, well, then you've got numerous legal issues, and you may also have tax issues, too.
If partnerships are informal, is it worth going in and making them formal?
Often it is, because of this potential of unlimited liability. Partners are jointly and severally liable for the debts of the partnership that arise out of partnership business. And a partnership has a special way that it files its taxes. It does it on a Form 1065, and then you have distributions that may be attributable to the individual partners. You might have guaranteed payments or salary, those types of things. And the assets that are deemed to be partnership assets could pass differently upon the death of someone that's deemed to be a partner. So, for example, if I'm in farming or ranching operations, say, with a sibling of mine, and I die and are deemed to have been in a partnership, then where does my partnership interest go? Well, it may end up, if we're just jointly owning everything, it may end up in my sibling's hands. And so now my sibling is dealing with perhaps my spouse, because my spouse may get my interest, my sibling might get my interest. There's a lot of uncertainty with respect to that, and it can really hamper the future of the business from generation to generation. So we need formality in that respect to make sure that if we want to transition the business, that these informal arrangements don't cause problems.
And as we're thinking about arrangements, a lot of times in leases, it's not a partnership, but maybe worth putting into that lease agreement.
Exactly. If I've got a tenant, often I don't want to be in a partnership with my tenant, whether it's a crop lease, a livestock lease, even an oil and gas lease. But often in the oil and gas situations or in mineral situations, we do have the agreement in writing because we're dealing with a company in that situation. So most of the time, what I'm talking about here would be crop or livestock situations. And we want to have a written lease that clearly specifies that in those situations is this lease to be construed as a partnership. Because, again, I don't want to be in a liability situation where I'm jointly and severally liable for something my tenant has done. So we just want to, again, put things in writing to clearly specify what our intent is with respect to relationships that we get into.
And something else really important to get in writing and do some thinking on estate planning. And what are some common mistakes you see in estate planning?
Well, like we said, the informal business relationship can be a mistake from an estate planning standpoint. But more specifically, I'd say the things that I would see is people are not careful in making sure that the way they own title to their real estate in particular complies with their overall estate planning goals and objectives. And so that would include the proper use of jointly held property, as well as IRAs, as well as any other document that has a beneficiary designation on it. We want to make sure that that beneficiary designation, or who would be the surviving owner on jointly held property, comports with my overall estate plan. Does it move the property in the way I want it to go once I'm gone? And so that's a key point, making sure that title ownership lines up with your overall goals and objectives of your estate plan. That's a big one that's out there.
And something else possibly important for the next generation, federal estate tax?
Well, that certainly can be an issue. Now, the federal estate tax doesn't apply to hardly any farms or ranches at all. The data indicate it's less than 1%. But that's because the current exemption is so high for the vast majority of farmers. It's at $13.61 million per person right now. So for a married couple, that's over $27 million that is protected from federal estate tax. And Kansas doesn't have a state-level estate tax or a state inheritance tax. That was repealed a couple of decades ago. But the concern that's on many people's minds is if the current law is allowed to sunset at the end of 2025, then that exemption would go from what we anticipate will be about $14.3 million per person next year down to about half of that starting in 2026. So then that becomes a game changer for a lot of farming and ranching operations. Now I've got half of my exemption to play with than I had before. And so we're just going to have to wait and see until we get past the fall elections and who's controlling the White House, the Senate, and the House to get a better handle on where tax policy is headed.
And Roger, something we've mentioned quite a few times, but important to still mention when we're thinking about estate planning, the difference between fair and equal and on-farm and off-farm heirs.
Yeah, that's a real big deal for many farming operations that have multiple heirs, but not all of them want to farm, or say only one wants to farm. I say that's a big deal because parents often have, as an estate planning objective, the objective of treating their kids equally. I want to be fair to all my kids, so I'll just treat them equally. Well, the point that I try to make to people is that those two terms are not the same. Fair does not always mean equal, particularly when we're dealing with a family business, which is what a family farming operation is, if you're intending it to continue from generation to generation. The off-farm heirs want dollars out of that inheritance. They want money. The on-farm heirs want control. So what we want to do is when we still can equalize out the inheritances, but it's in terms of different assets, so to speak. We have a control aspect that's worth something, control of the operation, ownership of the assets of the operation. And then we have cash that can go to the off-farm heirs. So a lot of times what we deal with in that situation are ways and mechanisms we can put in place to accomplish that objective. And that might include life insurance, buy-sell agreements, making sure the wills and trusts are properly drafted, and so on, so that we can have an equitable type split of value rather than an equal split on an asset-by-asset basis.
Is it important to tell someone where all this paperwork and stuff is located?
Well, that's a great idea, because if whoever is left behind to take care of things doesn't know where things are at, it can create a lot of chaos. So I suggest that you keep things in perhaps a safe at home or some other well-documented place. Don't necessarily put all your key documents in a safety deposit box at a bank, because then whoever needs access to it is going to have prior authorization or go through a court process after death to get access to that. But make sure things are organized and put in a safe place, and keep people know where those important documents are at. That's very important.
And thinking about planning, also important to do some Social Security planning for farmers?
Yeah, I often get the question as to when a person should start withdrawing Social Security benefits. And my kind of snarky response back to that is, I said, well, I can tell you precisely when you can start in terms of maximizing your Social Security benefits if you'll just kindly tell me when you're going to die. And, of course, they can't do that, and so I can't give a precise answer. We can just kind of give guideposts to think about. And then if they want to get into the weeds, I can do that. And, in fact, in some of my technical tax seminars, I have a segment where it takes about an hour to go through it, and that is whether Social Security should be viewed as a tax or an investment. And there is where we get into bend points and your accumulated career earnings and all types of calculations. But I think a couple of basic points here for us to keep in mind is that your maximum Social Security benefits can be received if you don't withdraw benefits until you reach full retirement age. And that's presently, for many people that are working, that's currently between 66 and 67 years of age. And you get additional benefits for every year that you postpone withdrawing benefits until you reach age 70. That's the first point. Another point to keep in mind is that some Social Security benefits are reduced once you reach certain thresholds. So, for example, for this year, if you haven't reached full retirement age yet, so you're not 66 or 67, and you have earnings of more than $22,320, then your benefits are going to get reduced. Let's say you started withdrawing benefits at age 62 when you became eligible to do so. Well, if you have earned income over that $22,320 threshold this year, you're going to lose $1 of your Social Security benefits for every $2 you go above that limit. And during the year you reach full retirement age, your earnings limit jumps to $59,520 with a $1 reduction for every $3 you go over that limit. Then once you hit full retirement age, from there on out, the limit on earnings drops off. That's why you'll see older people working in retail stores, for example, and they're earning income. They're not subject to losing Social Security benefits because they're probably age 70 and above.
For people who are interested in looking into maybe when they should start drawing their benefits, do you have a resource you recommend, Roger?
The Social Security Administration has, I think, some really useful online calculators that are on their website, and that's ss.gov. And just take some time if you're interested in this, play around with that. Also, if somebody hasn't done so already, you can set up an account with the Social Security Administration so you can track what your benefits would be if you started withdrawing at a particular time. And that can be fairly useful. It's got all your earnings data in there and other information you can use to help you make an educated determination as to when you should start withdrawing benefits.
That was K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. I will link the resource that he mentioned as well as his blog article in today's show notes on agtoday.net.